Good morning. It's day 7, and our special guest today is Crutcher. I just want to give you a little background on who he is before we start. If you don't know, he's written 12 novels. Deadline in particular was a huge favorite in my class, Chris. I'm always so appreciative you wrote that book. But I used the autobiography, King of the Mild Frontier, with my alternative ed students at night. And night after night, we read one of your short memoirs and wrote about all of the ways it connected to things that we felt as human beings. You've also written a book of short stories. You have the distinct honor of being the author with the most books on ALA's 100 most notable books of the 20th century, 5 more than any other author. And I think that people who don't know your work are just going to fall in love once they start reading it. But the reason we invited you on is you spent 3 decades full-time for 20 years as an adolescent therapist. And in fact, as chairperson for a child protective team in the state of Washington. And I think that we are all experiencing a lot of stress right now. And I'm just hoping you'll help us become more emotionally literate about what it means to be with kids day after day in times of stress, which of course for all of us is now, but for so many kids, it's going to be mid-September, mid-October. You know, it isn't about the pandemic as much as home. So right. Welcome. Thank you for spending time with us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
What are you thinking about?
You know, one of the things that I'm thinking about is partly because I'm always looking for whatever silver lining there might be, is this really does, this is uncharted territory for everyone. This is uncharted territory for parents, and it's uncharted territory for kids, because you know the time that they're spending in school, they're supposed to be spending in school, they're spending at home, and that's time that parents are usually gone working, or they're doing whatever they have to do to maintain the household or whatever. And now they're having to they're spending their time. Number one, they're the teacher. If they're doing any kind of homeschooling and things like that, they're the teacher, or they're setting their kids up with online things. But it's kind of like all bets are off. And in my mind, I'm hoping that this really levels the playing field, because one of the things about uncharted territory is that we learn more from it, I think, than we do from following our habits all the time.
Nice.
Like here's a chance to suspend some of the rules that you think you need when you have this really, really busy life, and you need people to be on a schedule, and you need them to get things done at a certain time. And all of a sudden, you don't have to do that anymore. You can play around with time a little bit. You're getting my little chime clock.
I was like, Kelly, is that you?
So I think I think this is a time when I think it's a time that's for parents. I think it's a time that they can actually come to a place where they can see the world through their kids' eyes. Now, most of us, if we have a good memory, we can take ourselves back to those kids' ages. But, even though we are a lot like our kid, I mean, evolution doesn't happen real fast. Human beings are human beings. Times are different. And so, my time growing up with, not seeing a television set till I was in the 5th grade, and then having like 2 channels, black and white, and the remote was a stick. You just push the other channel. and coming into a world where, there's 24-hour news feed and all of this connection things, times are really different. And people's kids have to be seeing the world differently than their parents saw it. And this is the time to spend, I mean, boy, if ever there's a rich time to get into that, and to allow, if I'm a parent in this situation, one of the things I'm going to try to keep doing is I'm going to try to allow equal opportunity for everybody. Everybody's opinion carries some weight. I mean, we're going to still have rules. Things aren't going to just fall into, everybody watching their iPad all day long. But we're going to have some communication, and everybody's opinion and everybody's perspective of things carries some weight. And all of a sudden, I can allow things to be said
Mm.
that kids might have been afraid to say, or I can let them know me a little better. You know, a lot of parents, a lot of kids can't tell you really. I mean, they can give you little details of their parents' lives. They can give you the things we brag about and all that, but they don't know that their parents get scared too, that this is a time where everybody feels uneasy. And I'll hear people saying, you know, we really want to keep kids calm. We want them to let them know everything's going to be okay. Well, yeah, in the end, everything will be okay, but we have to get from there to then. And one of the things that really makes kids feel better it is if I can see that my parents have the same misgivings, they don't know what to do either. So it isn't like I'm some idiot just being pulled along. We're all finding our way. And they'll listen to me. They'll listen to what I think I need. I'm not going to get it all, but we can have that conversation, and we can have it in a way. We can have it in a way that suspends, like I say, some of those rules that, you know, divide adults from kids.
Wow.
So would you say, Chris, that applies as well to, you know, the structure of the day? And, you know, a lot of parents are struggling with, you know, being home all day with their kids and still having the responsibilities of being parents. And how do I structure my day, or how do I spend my day with my kid?
Yeah, because I'm not going to spend the whole day with the kids. I can't. I have things to do.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're talking about older kids, if we're talking about adolescents, one of the things we're saying is, let's figure out everybody's responsibilities here for this time. You got a younger, you know, you're an adolescent kid and you have a younger brother or sister that you don't particularly spend a lot of time with. Today you're going to spend some time with them. Let's make some deals. Let's make some, you know, we'll have, you know, reward systems, whatever we need to just get a schedule going. But you're so right about the schedule, because if you just let it ride, everybody feels uneasy.
Mm-hmm.
But we have if we're doing school, if we're doing homeschooling, or if we're doing online stuff, if we're doing homeschooling, we set a schedule and we pretty much stick to it, because kids are real used to that. The bell rings, they go to a new class, all of that kind of thing. And whether they like the class or not, the structure is you know, it supports. So I'm gonna do that, and I'm gonna hold generally to that structure. And it's easier, I guess, to structure it around whatever the learning day is going to be. And we're going to put in some fun. You know, we're going to, you know, we have PE at school. We have recess at school for younger kids. We have lunch. So we're going to put those things in, and we're going to make them recognizable to the kids. But we can, you know, we can goose them. We can make them, you know, we can make them more fun. We can try some things that, you know, you couldn't do at school, because, you know, a class size at school is 30 and the class size at home is 2. So,
You know, I love writing myself, and I know you do, and Kelly does. But there's definitely we've been suggesting that teachers have students write about what this time is to them. And last night I was listening to the Flipgrid responses of my daughter's 5th graders, and a girl came on and shared how much she misses her grandparents. And some of the pushback we've got is that it's too traumatic for kids to write about this time. And what I would, that says a lot, but I want you to respond, because I don't think kids have to clip out graphs of the coronavirus and write about death, but to write about what it means right now. Because this little girl was just saying her grandparents live on the 1st floor of the house she lives in, and she's not allowed to see them. And that's all. It's not about something deeper than that, but she's missing them. So could you just talk about, like, are we putting kids in trauma by asking them to write about their own life experience at this time?
Never, never, never are we putting that. You know what? One of the things that always, this idea that we're supposed to do everything we can to make kids not feel pain of whatever kind, not feel trauma. I'm sorry, but this is planet Earth, and there's plenty of trauma to go around. Mm-hmm. And not all of it is devastating trauma. To have to not be able to see your grandparents on the floor down below you, which just seems god awful to a kid. It has to. To not be able to do that is one thing. To not be able to talk about it, to not be able to get response to it, is torture. I mean, that makes that on so many levels, that makes no sense to me. This idea that we want kids not to feel bad, that we want them not to think about certain kinds of things, that we want them. Why in the world would we not want children to think about loss at their level, at their developmental level? They're losing stuff every day. We all are. And how we grieve has so much to do with our mental health. And it's as true for little kids and big kids as it is anyone else. And part of the thing is, as a parent, you can follow. This is one of those things where you let your kid lead, because that kid is not going to take themselves someplace that they can't go. But we were talking earlier about this book that I'm working on right now that goes back. It's a nonfiction book that just talks about traumatized kids processing their trauma and the power that has, and the empowerment that it gives them to be able to use their imaginations and make things better, or to, beat down the bad guy, or to be the bad guy for a while, just any of those kinds of things. Every kid walks out of a session like that feeling like he or she has a little more influence over what happens next. And I think that's huge. It's like, when I used to talk, when I worked with teenagers, one of the things that you see all the time, I mean, you don't work with teenagers in a mental health center or a mental health situation where you're not going to run into suicidal thought. It's all over the place. And if you do it long enough, you're going to lose somebody. And it's serious stuff. But every kid that I've ever seen that really, really scared me felt like they had no chance of making things different. There was nothing they could do, no action they could take to gain some relief. And that would be the minute you know that as a therapist, boy, that's where you start working with them. It's like, what you walk with them through is any part of their life they want to walk to, so that you can find some place that they can get some traction. And it's true for adults, it's true at every age, and it's developmentally, it looks different, but it's true at every age, that when I can get that place and I feel like I can, I have some power over what happens to me next. I have some influence over my own life. Suicidal thought, depression, things like that lift. And it's not magic. You got to stay with it, but it's a pearl.
So there are a lot of, teachers who are wrestling with this idea of, when kids come back, even though it's distance learning, should it be business as usual? Let's see, where were we when we left off? Let's go. And Penny and I have kind of been of mind of, no, this is a historical moment that kids could think about in history, in science, in math, in English. What are your thoughts about that, Chris?
One of the things I love about what you guys do is that you make yourselves, you're intimate with the kids you work with. And your whole idea is that teachers have a job, kids have a job, that's true. But the more a teacher, or the more a kid knows, the more a student knows that I'm a teacher, but I'm a human being. And I when we're at the Booth Bay Writers thing, and I watch some of Penny's stuff, and I've seen it in yours too, where you write along with the kids and you go ahead and tell some things that are embarrassing or that make you feel bad, and your writing is, first draft crappy, and a kid sees a first draft crappy, a good teacher with a first draft crappy, it's okay to write their first draft crappy. And it's also okay when I see that person that I care about, that I know cares about me, expose herself or himself. It's gold. And this is a time for teachers that have a hard time doing that, because like when I went to teacher's school back in like the 60s, you were supposed to go in there and bring down the hammer. And my first day I came out, I thought, shoot, I forgot my hammer. And I realized I didn't forget my hammer. I didn't have a hammer. I had to figure out some other way to do this. But and the whole idea was relationship. And that willingness to say, that willingness to write, to tell my own story, and to let those kids see me tell the story. Well, I can do that if I'm a teacher that's had a hard time with that. This is the time I can break my own cycle. This is the time I can go back and say, okay, we all got traumatized. We all went through the same Invisible Man movie here. And I'm going to let you know what it was like for me. I used to say this all the time. When I would get a new kid, a client in my office, I just kind of getting to know them. I'd say, what's your favorite class? They never gave me their favorite class. They gave me their favorite teacher. And their favorite teacher was always somebody who would look at their life and not judge it, and try to help them find another way. And that's all therapy is.
I always loved
I look at this and I think of all the crazy testing and all the impersonal things that we've been doing in education for so long, and I think if this virus could do anything, it could absolutely blow up that idea of education.
It could. I was thinking as you were talking how you've said many times to teachers when I've been there that only a few kids get to see a therapist like you, and all kids see a teacher.
You have to have not only do you have to have really bad stuff happen to you to see a therapist if you're a kid, it has to be known. And those kids for whom it isn't known are in that classroom. And they go to a school and they are looking for the teacher.
And if it's known, it's probably been going on a long time.
And if it's known, And if it's known, it's the tip of the iceberg. Yeah.
It's so funny you said that about blowing stuff up, because I got a message yesterday on my phone from a teacher who said that writing notebooks aren't standards-based. And I was just so struck by how have we so changed the language about what it means to learn that we couldn't see what kids do in notebooks as valuable.
Yeah, I know. I mean, how crazy is that? Because when when you sit down to write, it's you and that. I do it on a computer all the time. When you sit down to write memoir, or you sit down to write your thoughts, it's just you and that notebook and that pen. And there's no better intimacy. It's why you love Scout, in To Kill a Mockingbird, because she's telling everything. And if you can get kids doing that, and they can see you do it. Education isn't worth much if it doesn't make your life better. And
that's a pretty big statement. When you're 15 and you're going to school, how is it making your life better? I was really struck by listening to some of the responses. We've asked teachers to respond to these conversations and how often we label kids. Well, I teach pre-AP, I teach the struggling, I teach the resistant, I teach the general, and I just think about, I don't remember those labels. I do remember being put in honors something, but those labels are such statements of quality that a person would take in as a human being, not as a subject. Does that make sense?
Because I hear teachers and just humans all over the place saying, they'll be talking about a kid or a group of kids, and they'll say, they're the good kids. And the minute you say they're the good kids, then there have to be the bad kids someplace. And the good kids are just ones that don't cause me a lot of trouble, right? They're not necessarily good kids. They're just kids. But you hear that, they're polite all the time, or they're, this and this and this all the time. And that's a way of evaluating that I don't think is very helpful to us.
Well, I think, again, it comes back down to this idea that Penny and I kind of explored a lot in 180 days, and that is this idea that good teaching is responsive to the kids who are in the classroom. That your job first isn't to teach stuff. Your job is first to teach kids. And just so happy you could join us today, Chris, because of such a, unprecedented moment in our lives, all of us around the world. And to hear your thoughts on how to connect to kids, I think is really a valuable message for teachers to hear.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll also say that I also think it's time, listening to you, I remember how funny you are, and that we all need a little humor in these times. And I'm going to, after we get off this, I'm going to go back and read The King of the Mild Frontier, which is one of the funniest books I have ever read. And I have never looked at a radiator the same since reading that book. If any of you out there have not read King of the Mild Frontier, move that to the top of your coronavirus relief reading list.
Thank you for saying that exactly, right? Let's read it because we need that. Not only you totally school the world on how to write memoir, because you take us to places that are tough, but you bring it right back and let us laugh, and then you go a little bit farther. Like that one scene where you bring that father up against the wall and you're writing about rage and anger, and my alt ed kids were like, but then you'd bring it back and let us just ease off a little. And they can recognize that. I think for craft alone, that book, yes to laughing, yes to our emotional health, but to writing craft, man, you are masterful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That actually, I had the same response when I was doing that.
That's good.
I'm this close to getting squashed.
So I don't want us to leave without mentioning that the nonfiction book you're working on right now, you briefly mentioned, I was lucky enough to read 2 chapters of, and I am so excited to see it come into the world because you and your friend, who is a therapist for very young kids, are working together to kind of interpret what a kid is doing. And then what I read was you were taking it, this is what it's going to look like. This kid's trauma, this is what it will look like in your classroom. And I learned so much reading that, just thinking about all of the signs that kids are giving us that they need us.
The more I worked on that, because I was in education, because I go to a lot of schools, or I used to go to a lot of schools. One of the things that I used to say is, I used to sit in my office with these kids who had, they'd been sexually abused, or they'd been beat, or they'd been pushed around the foster care system forever. And you'd be talking to them, and you get really deep into their lives and their responses to it. And you've been with them for like 6 months, so there's all kind of trust. And you think, this kid is also in a school somewhere right here in this town. And there's no way in the world anybody in that room knows this story, because you don't tell that story. It's way too dangerous to tell to strangers. And there are teachers there who know that stuff is in the room, but they don't know where it is. Because I will show you, I would much rather show you my rage than my vulnerability. And so when you get close to my vulnerability, I'll show you my rage. I will do whatever I have to do to escape. And when it's like, we've talked about, everybody has a story.
Mm-hmm.
And when you know that story, you can't treat a person the same way, the way you would. And what happens with these little kids, they are so metaphorical that they'll go into this playroom and they create their life out of imaginary things. I was telling you about that, and I'll say it real quick. Little kid, he made himself, he came into the playroom, and there's just every toy possible. And he finds this little toy garbage can. And he gets the garbage can and he names it, and it's him. And it's full of garbage. And he puts it on the side of the road. And it's garbage pickup day, and the garbage truck is coming. And he wants to do whatever he has to do to not get picked up. Because he knows he gets thrown in with all the rest of the garbage. And it's brilliant how he keeps himself from letting that garbage truck pick him up.
Oh my God.
And it brings me to tears, but he's delighted.
Yeah.
Because he gets to be individual garbage instead of just garbage.
It's a stark reminder, isn't it, that the kids in your classroom who appear on the surface to be the least lovable are the kids in your classroom who need the most love of anybody in that room.
And if you knew their story, they'd be a lot more lovable.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right.
Don Graves used to give us all this activity, this writing prompt. He said, list 4 kids that are on your mind right now for whatever reason, and then pick one and tell all you know about that kid, the situation. Imagine that kid and what that kid is struggling with. And no matter how many times I did it, it taught me something every time. Because when you write something, you're examining it closely and you begin to notice what you didn't notice, but it was registering with you somewhere. You see that kid in the seat they're in your class, and you notice things because you're paying attention. And how many times I think about individual kids and then try to write their story. And it isn't the product, the story. It's the fact that I'm looking more closely that makes me better the next day when I walk into class with all of the kids.
Well, you know, I just participated in this project, and I can't remember the name of it. I'll send it to you later because it's something that you guys might want to look at. There's a guy, and I know him because an old swimmer of mine who is an artist in the Village in New York now got in on this project with him. And the deal is what they've been doing with it is, and it's kind of a way they're doing it with mothers right now. But I looked at it and I thought, God, I wish I'd known about this and they had an idea about it, because it works a whole bunch of different ways. But a lot of times it's like particularly with girls who are struggling with their mothers, and I mean they're teenage kids and they're fighting it off. Tell your mother's story through your mother's eyes. And the minute I saw it, and I saw what a couple kids did with it, and it was like absolutely stunning. And so I thought, God, I wish I had, when I worked with parents and kids, if I had that tool. And so I sat down to do it with my own mom, and my mom's been dead since like 1993. But I sat down to do it, and I kept thinking, number one, what story do I tell? Mm-hmm. And then we got to tell it through in her language and her perspective. It's like, how is that person? You can do it with boys and their dads. You can do it. You can do it any way you want. Mm. But somebody that you really feel like you're in struggle with and need to understand, and you have to tell it in their language. And you have to tell it, just like you, they are making a case for themselves. Hmm. And my mom was the woman behind the man, and my dad was a real powerful man, and there was never any violence or anything like that. But after my dad died, and I told you this one other time, one of the most moving thing I ever heard my mother say, and the most revealing thing I ever heard my mother say was, "He didn't leave me anything to miss." Mm. And I mean, and you went back and back and back, and you think, wow, they were way better parents than they were mates. They didn't understand each other, and particularly, women in that time, he's a bomber pilot. And you look at that and you think, number one, please never let anybody say that about me. And two, if he knew that was what she thought, he'd come back and do it all over again. Mm. But they don't.
Well, the idea of looking at it through other people's point of view is such an interesting.
Yeah,
exercise. I think if I were in the classroom today, I would have kids walk in the door. They would pick roles. I'm a grocery store worker. I'm a paramedic. I'm an emergency room doctor. I'm a parent stuck at home all day. And just have kids write from those various points of view. Yep. Would be a fascinating thing to do with kids.
And look how it opens up. Look how it opens up their perspectives on particularly because adolescence is such a narcissistic time anyway, that, we always talk about the fact that that our frontal lobe doesn't develop until it's like 23 or 24 or 25. Well, part of that science, and part of that is because we don't develop it. You know, we don't push ourselves. We memorize stuff, but we don't push ourselves,
Right.
you know, toward that kind of more empathic way to be alive.
Right.
So true.
And education could do that. I mean, when you get into the world of stories, kid after kid after kid has said to me, it's so much easier to talk about a character in a book. I'm not going to tell my story, but I can sure, you know, and you can sit around and talk about a character in a book, but by the time you get finished, if it's a good conversation, you know which people in that room are your friends.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And you know a little 8-year-old at one time, you can always tell who the good teachers are because they like the same stories you like.
They're so perceptive.
Well, thanks again, Chris, for coming out with us today. It's really a great conversation, and I think a lot of teachers are going to find it very helpful to hear the words that come from your background and experience.
Well, thank you, and you know how appreciative I am of what you guys do.
Okay.
You're so nice. Well, teachers, will put a link up on Flipgrid to talk. There's a lot to say about this. So, Chris, thank you. Bye, guys.